The Game Schooler Podcast is a weekly audio show that educates new and experienced gamers about the awesomeness of tabletop gaming. In this week's episode, we'll cover Bonanza, Dahlias, our game of the week, discuss gatekeeping in the School of Gaming, and wrap it up by revealing our high five games with powerful abilities. Welcome to the Game Schooler Podcast. I'm your host, Doug Kotecki, along with my co-host, the esteemed Dr. Michael McCabe. How's it going, Michael?
How you doing, Doug? What's happening?
Pretty good. Not too much. Pretty light week. I do have one quick shout-out. I wanted to give a shout-out to Kristen for adding Point Salad to a game that we left off of our list of multi-use cards, which is
you brought some folks into the deep end of the follow-up pool.
Away.
Let's so for new listeners who are joining us, we have a very active and vibrant Discord community. And last week in our high five list, we talked about multi-use cards.
Oh God, this is a great description.
And we went into a lot of different games, and the game that Doug just mentioned, Point Salad, is one that we have covered and championed for the last several years. So yeah, that's a great call out, great follow up. I have some follow up. Am I okay to chime in, or did you have more?
Yeah, and I will do the backstory for your follow up
because you really hit the ground running there. I'll tell you what, folks, we've had an uptick in listeners over the last couple of weeks, and that's not an accident. Doug went to Gamma. He met a lot of people, said hello to a lot of people. Last week's games are two very popular games in Pirates of Maracaibo and Gnome Hollow. And both games from the latest episode are on Board Game Arena. And there's a Game Schooler Podcast fans group on Board Game Arena as well. Right now, we currently have 18 fans, but it's growing. It's growing. And wanted to connect that to our
subset.
It is. But connect that to our Discord group. There's a channel on our Discord for Board Game Arena. So if there's games that you want to try or play or experience or you're excited about, go ahead and check that out. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention in the follow-up is that videos are going up on YouTube and BGG, and it is a ton of work that's been completed by Doug, and I just want to thank you for that. You are a husband and a father. You run your own business, and this is a hobby. This is a passion, the Game Schooler Podcast, in addition to being a part of the hobby, the board game hobby.
Yeah.
So thanks for doing all that and getting those videos out there, just chopping up our segments that we do on the podcast and pushing them out there. So good work on that, Doug.
Thank you. Happy to do it. And, we're always looking for ways to do more stuff, but not make it a full-time job, and so some of that content will be changing as we evolve and figure out how exactly we're going to best move forward with what we can put out and what we have the time to do. So, but it is a great reminder to go to the YouTube channel. That is at Game Schooler U, and subscribe there, watch some of the videos, like it, leave comments, all of those good things. We would appreciate that.
Hard to believe we're 211 episodes in. The time just, the days are long, the years are short, whatever cliche you want to use.
Yeah.
It really, really is. Anything else to follow up, or should we jump into what's awesome with gaming?
No more follow-up. I've got an awesome thing. How about you?
Bring it. Same.
All right. Well, I recently started to dive into the graphic novel adventures Junior. So that has been a really interesting and cool experience, and I'm hoping to get through more of them and do some more stuff before we talk about it in greater detail. But I did try it with my 7-year-old.
What is it?
The graphic novel. Look at me using jargon and blowing past people. The graphic novel adventures are a graphic novel book that's somewhat like a choose-your-own-adventure mixed with a game. So essentially you are looking at panels of a comic strip and then making choices that allow you to turn to different pages or use various items and go to different pages to see what happens when you use those items. It's part of a bigger series from Van Ryder Games that are just the graphic novel adventures. The junior versions are designed for young kids, emerging readers, and things like that. So I tried the first one with my youngest, the 7-year-old, and it started out okay, but she lost interest. But that very much could be a personality thing as opposed to a graphic novel adventures thing, right? Just was not captivated by it. However, my 9-year-old, soon to be 10-year-old, dove right in and could not get away from it. And she like, oh, well, I want to go back and try it again and do different paths and try and find all of the hidden things that you're supposed to find in the tools. And as you go through, for example, one of them was like, if you have this spider key, you can get into this room. And it's like, well, we don't have the spider key. And so she wanted to go back and like, we got to try and find the spider key because I want to know what's behind that room and or in that chest and things like that. So the verdict is still early. However, I do have one that's very much interested in it and one that is ho-hum, but I think it has more to do with the youngest's personality than it does with the actual game. So it seems pretty cool, and I'm looking forward to diving into the other books in the series along with kind of a bigger scenario that they have as well. So I'll keep you.
Now I want to know about the spider key, or do I have to come back for episode 212? And will that be in a future follow-up? Are you going to put it in the Discord? Is it going to be an Easter egg in one of these overview videos that you've been like? Talk to me here.
I'm hoping that the game. Once we're done with the first book, so I'll send that one home with you, because I think your youngest will enjoy that as well, and then keep going through it, and perhaps this will show up in certainly a Spotlight or a School of Gaming or possibly Game of the Week in the future, because I think the game schooling and gaming implications of a system in a game like this are really cool.
That is awesome, Doug. That truly is awesome. I have been learning games, and my New Year's resolution for 2025, here we are, quarter of the way through the year, and I'm going to refer to it. So I'm showing you,
you're
Doug,
still on
I'm holding myself accountable here that I'm trying to have fun learning games.
Mine lasted 48 hours.
My resolution. And, it is incredible to just sit down and to dive into a game. And for a long time, I kind of pushed back on the sense of, are we reviewers? Are we this? Are we that? And I'm kind of comfortable now saying that I'm going to give this game a review. I'm going to open up the box, get the pieces out, sort through the rulebook, and just try to play it. And right now I'm learning the game Daitoshi from Devere Games and designed by Danny Garcia of World Wonders fame. If you want to know more about Danny Garcia and a brilliant game, go check out World Wonders at episode 153. It was a game of the week just before we started broadcasting via video. And I don't know where it's going to go, but what I do know is that, and I guess what I'm saying, games that I play all by myself that are solo, that are like, I'm not sure this is going to fit with either Spotlight or Game of the Week segment. I don't know if I'll bring it to the game group. I don't know this. I don't know that. I think I'm just going to put some of those thoughts and wonderings out onto the solo channel on our Discord. I've done that in the past.
Yeah.
Without any prompt or with things that I backed and bought and crowdfunded. So it's like, well, why not, if I get a game as a review copy, throw it out there. So that's been fun, thinking about how to create additional content and where that content would fit. Is it a mini review? Is it an overview? Is it just a single playthrough? Or is it just, here's a description of the game and how long it took me to set it up, and a partial play, a full play? So continuing to learn about games is awesome. And it's something that I really do enjoy doing, and I'm glad that we get to talk about it on our show.
All right, cool. You ready to move on to the Spotlight?
I am. Are you?
Yes. All right, so this week we're going to be talking about Intarsia, published in 2024 by Deep Print Games and Pegasus Spiele. The designer is Michael Kiesling, and the artist is Lucas Sigman. 2 to 4 players, about 60 minutes, ages 10 plus. The Café de Paris is closed for renovations because the beautiful parquet floor has fallen into disrepair. But to secure the contract and complete the ornate inlay work, you must prove yourself worthy. In Intarsia, players take on the role of woodworkers trying to demonstrate their prowess by earning the most points and winning the job. Throughout the game, players will spend material cards to place wood elements onto their personal floorboards. At the start of each round, players get a starting hand card. Each player takes the 10 material cards depicted on the card, and the building phase begins. In turn order, players take building actions until they cannot or do not want to carry out a building action and must pass. To build, players must discard material cards to add a wood element to their floorboard. The number of materials required varies depending on the type of wood element. Frames, for example, require 1 material card of the ornament's color. Every piece that fits inside that frame must also use the same color materials as the frame. So, for example, players must discard 2 purple material cards to add a midsection to a purple frame. Wild material cards count as any color, and any 2 cards can substitute for any individual color card. To branch out further on your floorboard, you need to purchase connectors, which cost 4 material cards of a single color. Building more ornate wood elements, such as midsections, cores, tables, and connectors, allow you to take additional materials from the supply. And in addition to bonus materials, players may also be able to claim tools based on the patterns and inlays that they apply to their floor. Each tool belongs to a set, and the more tools you can acquire from the same set, the more points you'll score. After all the players pass each round, points are awarded based on the number of connectors each player has, and starting material cards are drafted to start the next round. The game ends after 3 rounds, and players earn points based on the size of each ornament on their floor. For example, a complete 4-piece ornament earns 12 points, and the player with the most points wins the game. All right, so that is Intarsia. Michael, what do you like about this one?
This is one of my favorite games that we brought back from Gen Con 2024 for the following reasons. I really enjoy the interaction between the tiles that I'm bringing in and putting down on my floor and the potential rewards that are out there with tools that can help me to maximize my floor and my scoring. And so there's that 2-part puzzle that's happening. And although the interaction there's not a ton of verbal interaction, there's enough interaction based on what other players are doing on their turns that I really enjoy that back and forth. Clearly, this game is going to draw a lot of comparisons to Azul because it has beautiful, pretty pieces and it's designed by the same designer. But to me, I get a very different feeling than when I'm playing Azul, both in the interaction and in the actual gameplay.
Yeah, there's certainly a subtle tension between the players as people are racing towards tools and pieces to put on their board. Those wooden pieces are restricted based on the number of players. So, you may want to have an orange frame, but there may not be any orange frames left. So there is a subtle race. There's a bonus track around the board that as you get connectors and things like that, you can move around there and get more cards back. To me, what I really like about this game is a game similar to the same thing that I like about a game like Tapestry is how far can I stretch my turn? How far can I go and kind of maximize that puzzle and that efficiency before I have to pass?
Well, and what I like too is thinking through into the next round. Yeah, I might be able to get 2 more turns this round. But if I hold on to the cards that are in my hand now, and then if I'm heading into the next round in better position, I'm actually going to be able to optimize, to have better plays. So it's that sense of when to spend and when to save.
Yeah.
And it hits very, very early in the game as well.
Well, and it's not, as far as the comparisons between that and Azul, this one is not as directly competitive as Azul, where you can really make turns that are just like, well, you're getting stuck with that. That is not really happening in Intarsia. There are moments where, oh, I was right about to claim that bonus or things like that, but nothing where anybody is outwardly, I did that to screw you over type of situation.
Yeah,
Right?
I agree with that, and I really like the reward payouts as well. And so there's this little tracker that moves, as Doug had mentioned, and when so I might think that I have a very specific reward coming, but then the player just before me actually activated that, and now it's moving to a different spot. And so, what am I going to do? Am I going to execute the decision that I had planned, or do I need to leverage some of that tactical thinking? And is there suddenly a better opportunity? It's not that the whole game just slows down and I have to wait until it's my turn to plan. It's more of a, well, the board is shifting, and how am I responding to that shift? And for those reasons, this is a game that really works for me.
Yeah. Well, and it's the not only is that they took the one that I was going to take, that bonus. What is weird about that or frustrating is you have to be thinking 2 to 3 turns down the line. And sometimes that bonus is like, okay, well, I get those 3 cards, then those 3 cards is going to give me my 4 to build a connector. When I do the connector, I'm going to get the, so you're constantly reevaluating and doing that cascading sheet of what the next steps and actions are. When you build, for example, the midsection, so there's a frame that is colored, and then you build the next piece in. That one requires 2 of the same color. And when you build that, you get a reward of 1 color, another color material back. You can't take the same one that you had just used. So it's, okay, I'm going to do that and spend these purple ones to again get a brown one, which then I'm going to use the 3 brown ones to build the intersection here. And so you're kind of doing all of that mapping. There's a lot of calculations that are, I kind of feel like a Beautiful Mind, that movie, while I'm playing this game, because you're like, beep, 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 beep. Rain Man, you're kind of always calculating, and not in a
Not where it slows down, though, to a halt. Not in the games we've played. Not
in a mathy way, and not in a really complex where you're just like, oh, what am I going to do? It's like, they're real fast options.
Yeah.
The only concern I have with this game for me is I really enjoyed playing it. It, of course, looks beautiful on the table, well done production, but the game doesn't feel that different to me from game to game.
Okay.
Yes, you start out with different starting cards each round, but once you kind of get into it, like I feel like each game kind of plays out the same, and so it doesn't necessarily draw me back over and over again.
And that's interesting. I think because and I'm not trying to be contrarian. I mean, have your feelings, Doug. Own your feelings. That's great. Where I was going to go, the game plays so differently at 2-player than it does 3-player. And I think I've been fortunate to play with different play groups, right? I've played this game with you. I've played this game with my wife. I've played this game with our game group at 3 players. And in each setting, it plays very differently.
So I agree that the way that the interactions change the different amount of players, correct? Right.
Yep.
I think what I'm saying when I feel like it's kind of the same is that the way I feel while I'm playing the game, like what I'm doing, is very samey. It's like I like the puzzle, but there's not a lot of new wrinkles to the puzzle every time that I play the game. It's still the same type of puzzle. I'm still feeling the same thing throughout it the entire time, even if it plays or feels different based on the interaction with the number of players.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It makes total sense. One of the things that I really like, and I just want to touch on a couple skills, I like how the tools chain together, right? So if you have the tools fire off in order from left to right, just as if you're reading across a page. And if you get 3 or 4 tools out, you can have some pretty big turns, and that is a nice little feeling, a nice little bonus in game where points can be somewhat tight, and all of a sudden, you're getting a point here and 2 points there and another point.
Yeah.
Look, I got 4 points from putting that one tool down.
Yeah, if you have a saw and it scores 2 point or 1 point, the next time you play a saw, you get that 1 point again plus the points on the new saw. So and then if you do another one, you're getting the 1, the 2, and then the 3 or whatever. So you're getting 6 points the third one that you play down.
And the way that my compulsive brain works, I'm constantly chasing that right in the game.
Yeah.
So it's like, I got to get the biggest reward engine possible. And yet I tend to come up short. And it's that push to try to get a 5 point, a 6 point turn. Look what I could do. And the other thing that I was just going to say, I think this game can work well. It has worked well in my house with that 9 to 12-year-old. If you're willing as a gamer, as an adult gamer, to just pause and have a partial play. If you can get Intarsia out on the table and be like, hey, we might, in your mind, think I might only get half this game played, and that's okay. And then we'll come back to it. If you have a place where a game can live for up to a week and you're okay with that, this is a game that can work well in phases, that can work well, and we're going to play a round now, and then I'm going to teach it a game in this first round, and then we'll come back to it, because it does look beautiful on the table, and there is something, it can go, that 45 minutes to an hour, if you break that into 2 or 3 different sessions, it can work for a lot of families in a lot of settings like that. Not necessarily in a schoolhouse where you might only have 24 minutes and you can't leave it set up, established on the kidney table for a whole week. But that's just one thing that I wanted to say to our listeners as well.
Yeah, certainly a beautiful production and a game that I think is like, if it's raining outside and you're stuck indoors for the afternoon, like this is a curl around the table type of game that I think works really well. And I can see it being a lot of people's favorite game, right? If you enjoy Azul, but you want something that's a little bit less cutthroat and a little less backstabby, this is a great option for you to play. So if you like those type of feelings, that's I think the wheelhouse for this game.
Well, and on my shelf, it sits with Labyrinth, a game that we've talked about in the past, which is more of a kid's game. Adventureland, which is, to me, a step up from this and more of a strategy, and Gnome Hollow from last week. And your route building, it's beautiful, and it fits somewhere in between those games, at least in my brain. So, I love having this on my shelf, and I really look forward to future plays. I'm glad we got to talk about it in our Spotlight segment today, Doug.
Yep, so that is our Spotlight Intarsia from Deep Print Games and Pegasus Spiele. Before we move on to the game of the week, just want to remind everybody, Michael talked about earlier, great Discord server that we have, gameschooler.com/Discord, to check that out and join that community. Continue to watch, subscribe, and like our YouTube channel at GameSchoolerU. Spread the word about the podcast. If you know somebody that you think might enjoy this, is looking for more of a casual board game podcast, please recommend us. And if you have any questions or comments, reach out to us, email at gameschooler.com. Now let's move on to the game of the week.
The game of the week. The game of the week is an in-depth look at a family-friendly game we think you should try if you get the chance. This week's game is Bonanza and Dahlia. Doug, give us the stats.
Or Bonanza Dahlias. Published in 2023 by Amigo. The designer is Uwe Rosenberg, and the art is by Beth Sobel. It is for 3 to 5 players. It plays in about 45 minutes. Ages 10 plus on the box. I think 8 plus. Board Game Geek goes crazy with 6 plus. I think that is a stretch.
I do too.
But this is going to be a family game, and it's time to plant some flowers and beat your fellow gardeners to the market to score the most cash. In Bonanza Dahlias, players collect, trade, plant, and harvest beautiful dahlia flowers to be the most profitable florist by the end of the game. Players start the game with a random hand of 5 flower cards. The tricky part is that players can never rearrange or reorder the cards in their hand. On their turn, a player must plant the first flower in their hand into one of the fields before them. You may also plant the next card in your hand if you'd like. If you need to plant a flower type that isn't already in one of your fields, you'll need to harvest a set of your existing flowers first to make room for the new flower. After the mandatory planting, you reveal 2 cards from the draw deck. The turned over cards belong to you. You can plant them in your fields or use them to trade with other players. Trading with the other players gets unwanted cards out of your hand and increases the value and can increase the value of your fields. But be careful, because cards that you don't trade must be planted at the end of your turn, even if you don't want to. For the final phase of your turn, you'll draw 3 cards, one after another, and add them to the back of your hand. You can harvest flowers from your fields at any point during the game. You'll remove the cards from your field and consult the market price on the front of the card based on the number of flower cards that you harvest. For example, you earn 2 cards if you harvest 5 Bumble Rumbles. You're going to flip 2 of those flower cards over to the coin side, which is the reverse side of the card, and then stack them by your field and then discard the rest. When the draw pile runs out, reshuffle the discard and continue playing. The game ends when the draw pile runs out for the 3rd time. At that point, players harvest any flowers in their fields and count the number of coins they have earned throughout the game. The player with the most cards wins. So that is how you play Bonanza Dahlias. There's going to be some comparisons here to the original game of Bonanza. And I'm going to start with 2 things that I like. I used to have the original Bonanza in my collection. It is no longer in my collection.
Sad day.
But this game is the one that replaced it. And I like it because it's easier to get set up and playing compared to the original Bonanza. So in this game, it's for 3 to 5 players. You're using all the cards in the deck, no matter how many players you have playing. In the original Bonanza, you had to take certain bean cards out depending on player count.
It's not that big of a deal. I love how people act like it's such a chore and labor and prevents them from getting it to the table.
I'm not saying it prevents me from getting it to the table. However, if you play with a full set of players and then go back and all those cards are shuffled and you have to go back and find the cocoa beans, it takes longer to get the game set up. Is this a earth-shattering amount of time? No, but I like not having to deal with it.
Yeah.
The other thing that I really like about this is that in the original Bonanza, you can purchase more fields.
3rd field. It's a race to get it. Who's going to get there first?
And I like that this game does not have that. I like that it keeps the game moving and it forces you to make harder decisions. Is that, when you play in the original game, you get that 3rd field. It's like, all right, now I have a little bit more flexibility and I don't get put into those positions where it's like I have to harvest the field early. This one, because it takes out that extra rule, I don't have to explain it to anybody, and you just play, and it forces you to deal and makes you a little bit more anxious to trade and willing to trade, and I like that about this version.
You sending it back to me?
I'm sending it back to you.
Thank you. As longtime listeners will know, I am a fan of Bonanza. The original Bonanza Uwe Rosenberg with those wonderful coffee beans, with all the different flavors of beans. Our original copy from very early in our marriage, it has a sticker on it with our last name because my wife takes it into the schoolhouse so much. Bonanza Dahlia is one that I ran to Gen Con when it opened the first day that we got there to get. Went to my wallet and was like, I need this game. And Corey and Alex, our friends over at Amigo, I mean, I could not wait to get a hold of this game. And I love it. Absolutely love it. I think Doug made a really good point. I personally like the ability to buy the 3rd field. However, you want to play the game with kids and maybe with folks who aren't playing 500 hours of board games a year, Bonanza Dahlia is more approachable because it takes that decision out. You are more incentivized to trade based on what's in your hand and not on trying to just, I'm trying to use very family-friendly language here on our podcast, which is usually not a challenge, but be a jerkhead to others. Like, I feel like the trading component in Dahlia is friendlier than the cutthroat nasty of the original. There's a lot to like here, and the art, the gameplay, the ease of getting it to the table, all of those things that you mentioned. Our games don't tend to last 45 minutes like it says on the box. That's one thing I wanted to ask you in your family. To me, this it tends to play in more of a 20 to 30 minute time span, but maybe that's just because we know the rules and we have it down.
Yeah, I think it probably depends on how choosy people are with trading and making deals and things like that. I do appreciate that this game has what I would call mutually beneficial trading, unlike a lot of other trading games that come out. And I think about even a great game like Catan that has trading, and you get that person every round that's like, I got some sheep. Anybody can give me a rock for some sheep? I have all this sheep. This one, a stone, whatever, mountain. This one, because you only have the 2 fields, you are really incentivized to clear out your hand when you can. So if I've got a card that's clogging up that I'm going to have to plant next turn, yeah, I know that that's going to help Michael by giving it to him, but I'm going to do whatever I can to try and make a deal so I can clear it out of my hands so I don't have to get rid of my Glorias sooner than I wanted to.
Yeah,
I could be looking at a hand of 2 Glorias and then a pumpkin seed and then 2 Glorias right after it. And I'm like, I got to get rid of this pumpkin so I can get access to those Glorias and harvest a bigger payday. So I like that it's beneficial for everybody. There is times, though, when your hand works out great and you don't have to trade. And so it is something to be aware of with younger players. I think this is going to be this is why I put it at the starting point of 8, and it's going to be touchy depending on the type of players that you have in your house, right? You have some kids that are going to laugh and go, I can't believe I have to get rid of this and plant this flower I don't want. You have other kids that's going to turn into tears. Sometimes you will get stuck with a flower on that draw that nobody wants or they're not going to take, and you're going to have to harvest a field that you don't want to. So, be aware of that depending on how your kids react to that type of situation. But for me, it's a fun family game that gets that has the right amount of bite. So there is a little bit of pain in this game. However, everybody's talking. Yeah. Everybody's talking the entire game and interacting with one another. And it's like, you cannot play this game and be silent.
Yeah, it's not a heads down Uwe game. This is a high interaction game. And what I wanted to jump in on, but I didn't want to interrupt you there, that interaction of tears and frustration, it's only happened in our house in the full 5-player game. Because once you get into 4 or 5 players, then you're limited to 2 fields. When you're playing the game at 3 players, that's where you have the 3 fields. And
I believe you have that reversed.
For 3 players, you have the 3 fields. 4 players, you have the 2 fields. Yeah.
You said 3 when you have 5 players, I thought.
Oh, I don't know. Well, you'll have to play it back in the editing. I thought I had it right. In my brain, I had it right. But where I was going is the rule book is really good, folks. Really good. And I think Amigo got a lot of things right in the production, how the game sits on the shelf, how easy it is to just throw in a bag and take with you. This is a game that has often lived in my quiver, where I've got a bunch of other card games, and the play mats can kind of sit right across there as well. But that issue that Doug talked about, maybe it's not an issue in every house. This is a game where you know your kids, you know your play group the best. If you have that direct interaction where somebody's going to get upset if someone does not agree with them for a trade, or, Dad, you traded with them, but you wouldn't trade with me. Rah! I mean, you got to just be prepared heading into the game. It is that type of game where I think the more trades you make, the better off it's going to be. That's always been my Bonanza approach. The more I trade, the better it's going to be for me and for me. I'm trading now. I'm trading in the future. I'm always trading. But go ahead.
I think it's pretty. I think it works out pretty well that almost once per game, everybody is going to get stuck planting a card that they don't want to plant.
Yes.
Right. So it's not like, oh, you're going to play the whole game and it's only going to be one kid that gets stuck with that. It's like it's going to happen one or two times every game to everybody, where they can't make a trade, can't make a deal, and they've got to harvest something earlier than they wanted to.
Yeah, and I don't know what it is about this version compared to the first version, but the initial Bonanza with the angry bean on the cover, that one could have a runaway leader. And the downside of that game is we clearly have another 30 minutes to go, and you are clearly winning. Yes, you got the early lead. Yes, we know that you've got the monopoly on the wax and the coffee, and you're building your lead every round that goes by. But in preparing for this show, the plays in our house have been very, very close. My wife tends to win in Bonanza Dahlia, and I'm okay with that because this is one that when it gets to the table, people are having fun, but we don't have the 30, 17, 14 games. This is more of a 21, 19, 14, 14, or a 17, 16, 14, 14 game. So whatever they did in the development of it, I'm not going to say that was addressed, but in our game plays, it's close. And I think that's part of the fun of it as well.
All right, what kind of skills you got in this one, Michael?
Well, I got just straight up observation. Well, you have to know what other people need and what other people are doing in that negotiating, so you know when to hold them, you know when to fold them, and you know when to just walk away, right? And if you haven't heard that before, maybe we should trademark that in the Game Schooler podcast. Don't know if it's available.
It seems catchy.
But that skill of observation is here, and what I really like about it is it's one that young gamers catch onto quickly. First time a trade goes around and it does or doesn't happen and people see how that's carried out, suddenly they know like, ooh, you can give me a card if I ask for it? Interesting. And also just being able to see the order of the cards that are coming up, because the order of the cards in your hand are so critical. You have to be paying attention.
Yeah. Yeah, so, just to point out, the big sacrifice I guess you're making between this and the original Bonanza is the player count, right? The original goes from 2 to 7 players. This one is 3 to 5. So you are reducing your play count down. To me, I think the changes to do that make it worthwhile. The other skills I've got is group discussion. People are going to be talking while this game is going on. And I love that about this game. Very often, you would associate the level of communication in this game to something that you would find in a party game, but it's wrapped up into a game that's a little bit more strategic and thinky. There's also the risk management of how close you're going to ride that rail of can I get these beans down? Do I hold off? Do I harvest them now? Or maybe I have a chance to add a couple more flowers there before I've got to get rid of them and things like that. And that can be risky, and it's going to lead to...
Risk management can be risky, Doug. I concur.
Yeah. And but it can lead to some of those moments that we talked about where I don't want to be planting that. And so I think it's a great game to teach resilience. Like, all right,
that's good.
Harvest that field and let's move on. Now you're building... You're building the pumpkins. Now you're building, whatever seed that you've planted. Now you're in that flower game. Let's start building that and stop worrying about the one that you just had to give up on.
Yeah, I had concentration, risk management, and resource management as being grouped together as a category of skills where I really need to be focusing on how I'm going to manage the fields and when I want to get that payout. So that's that sense of resource management with the slight risk management as well. And especially as the game goes on, I can I think I know, like, you have 4 cards in your hand and I know 3 of them. So I'm fairly certain you're not going to make a trade. And then the person sitting to my left, they have 6 cards in their hand and I know 4 or 5 of them. So look, if I don't pick up this card, I what am I going to do here? And I love that, that even though I don't actually know, but I think I know. I think I know what you have in your hand, and so I like how that resource management evolves in this game as well. I'm also trying to manage your hand as well as my hand so that I can optimize what's in my field. And seeing kids play that out as well, my 9-year-old and 12-year-old might not go through that same sort of calculation, but definitely that is how my 16-year-old is playing the game, looking across the table, trying to shake down what other people have in their hand so that they can make a decision. So
yeah, it's not too often, but I'm going to say that this is just a great family game, and one I think that we think that you should try if you get the chance. That's our game of the week, Bonanza Dahlias from Amigo.
The School of Gaming. In the School of Gaming, we discuss concepts, keywords, etiquette, and helpful ideas in the world of gaming. This week, we ask and discuss gatekeeping in the hobby.
Yeah, so gatekeeping in the hobby today compared to maybe what it was in the past. And I have a very interesting thought on this, is that I think gatekeeping in the hobby exists, but not in the place that people assume that it exists. So I don't see gatekeeping at the table. I think that we've done a very good job as a community to welcome everybody at the table. I've sat down with a wide range of folks, people that I don't run into in my daily life.
Yeah.
And people have been pleasant and awesome, and everybody has been welcoming. I have never sat down at a table outside of my game group at a convention where I was like, this is not going well and people are treating me poorly, or I see people treating other people poorly.
Oftentimes a code of kindness at the table. Very, 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 very often.
I think we do really well at that. I think people are getting blocked before they even get to the table. And I think it shows up a little bit in what we kind of talked about last week, where folks tend to classify what a, quote, real gamer is. And the idea that you have to fit in or meet a certain set of criteria in order to be a gamer.
So are you saying when we were talking about too much jargon in last week's School of Gaming, is that where? Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
In part of the ways where people look at folks and it's like, well, how frequently are you playing? Because if you only play one game a month, you're not a gamer. You're not, this is not being said deliberately, but you're not as good as I am at gaming, so you're not welcome at my table, essentially. People saying, based on what games other people enjoy. It's like, if you like a game that you bought from Target that's a mass market game, if you like Monopoly, you're not a real gamer, so don't bother sitting at my table if that's something that you like. Or if you're not consuming board game content, if you're not listening to podcasts, or you don't know what Board Game Geek is, don't bother sitting down at my table. Those are, or in regards to last week talking about jargon, it's the idea of like, if you have jargon ignorance and don't know what some of those terms are, you're not on the same level as me. So don't bother sitting at my table. That's where I feel like I see gatekeeping is more in the elitism of folks in the hobby that isn't necessarily being said directly, but that inadvertently is sending a message of, you need to have the same level of knowledge that I do to sit down at a table and play a game with me. And I feel like those barriers don't exist when you show up at a convention because everybody just, first of all, you're at a convention, so you already meet one level of credibility.
Yeah.
And then you sit down and just start playing, and you're not having that. But in the conversations outside of conventions or talking to strangers or talking about your hobby, that those vibes that are getting put off are the ones that are actually keeping casual gamers and people that play games with their families that don't necessarily want to dive in as deep. That's where I see gatekeeping today.
Yeah, that's interesting. You've really taken me on a journey through my mind here. When I was a kid, I had that experience that is in so many, Disney and Pixar films of the new kid at school walking into lunch, right? Well, that was my life many of school year. I would walk in usually at the start of the year, but sometimes in the middle. And it's almost like if you take that scene, right? New kid walking into lunchroom, and then you combine that with trying to get into a club, right? And there's a bouncer, and there's somebody who's looking at your ID to make sure that you meet the certain criteria, which is usually an age, right, to get into the club, and you combine those two things, and
a handsomeness.
Well, I've never had to worry about that, Doug. Take that for
you're always getting booted.
A face made for radio. When in the hobby, I think it really does connect to what we were talking about last week with that sense of jargon, of requiring a level of expertise in order to sit at the table.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is it's just that level to actually get to the table. Once you're at the table, you're in a good spot, but there can be a lot of barriers that are intentionally or unintentionally preventing people from getting there.
Yeah, I think I've shared this story on the podcast before, but I'll repeat it because I think it's very applicable here, is that when I first started learning how to play guitar, and I was using a secondhand guitar from my brother that he got from God knows where, and he wasn't playing, and I just picked it up and started to play. And I went into a guitar store. There's a local guitar shop a town over, and I went in there, and I asked the guy behind the counter what he thought of the brand Epiphany. And the brand is actually called Epiphone. And it was a perfect example of the guy did not make me feel like an idiot for not knowing what the brand name was or saying it wrong. And, was nurturing and welcoming in that. But that is an example of, I could see sometimes gamers being like, you idiot, that's not called Epiphany. It's Epiphone. What's your problem? Why wouldn't you know that? And that type of attitude that just shuts the door on people with whether it's intentional or not, that type of thing is what, to me, keeps people away from the table. That's the type of gatekeeping that's going on. And being aware and cognizant of how we respond to new gamers or casual gamers or friends and family that will, occasionally play a game with us, or, once a month or at every holiday family get together, they play a game. And it's like, have a little bit more grace with how we interact with those folks. And maybe they will become more entrenched in the hobby if they'd like to. But certainly if we have the wrong attitude, they're not going to, right?
Yeah, I think being clear is being kind. So I want to just take this two different parts. What might not make sense to some of our listeners, like, what are these guys talking about? All right, in both of our houses, there are 400 board games. We are weirdos. And yet we have both had experiences, for me very recently, where I've walked into a board game store, one that I've frequented dozens of times before, and kind of felt out of place. Maybe not even felt welcome. Like, boy, I don't belong here because I don't know about the latest Pokemon release. I don't know what type of paint my friend wants. I don't know what type of candles my child wants. I don't know. And that sense of for somebody who typically in many phases of my life, I operate in a very high level of control. I know what I want to do and when I want to do it and how I want to do it. That actual experience, that can feel like I don't belong, and because I don't belong, that there's somebody keeping me there, when it's not that it's intentional. It's that our hobby is so vast and there are so many different places to plug in to belong and not belong. And that, like, this is really connecting back to the jargon from last week, that I also think that it is perfectly acceptable and fine to communicate with people about the level of expertise that's required. You know, and thinking through a convention that we go to, a regional convention, Gamehole Con in Madison, Wisconsin, October, if anyone's interested, awesome place. Event submissions are coming up and they're due in 10 days. And I'm actually thinking that through. If there's an event that I want to do where, you know what, this one might not actually be open to brand new game. People might need to have played the game before, and that's okay, because there's a description where I can put that previous experience with this game is required, and that's where is it Epiphone?
Yeah,
that's where
the actual name. Yes,
that's where your Epiphone story, I think, is such a great little tie-in, because as long as we have a way to clearly communicate kind of the level of knowledge or expertise that is required to interact, I think that's where you're mitigating against gatekeeping 9 times out of 10. But where there's this sense of you must know this part of the hobby at this level to even belong, that's where things can really get off the rails, at least for me, as a gamer and somebody who's very curious about different parts of the hobby. I mean, I look at myself over the last 2-3 years. I've played Dungeons and Dragons for the first time. I've played war games for the first time. I continue to want to learn more about other RPG and adventure-based games that have their own branch on the tree of the hobby. So, there's a lot there.
Well, and it'll tie in great with, well, first of all, let us know if you've run into gatekeeping and what kind. We'd love to hear what people are running into, right?
And have we ever been guilty of it? I mean, really, if we have, probably prefer an email, but go ahead, let us know on the Discord, like, because I don't think it's always intentional, Doug, and I didn't mean to just interrupt you there, but I think when I run into it, I don't think people are always aware that they're actually doing it.
Well, and that then also great ways to combat that or be welcoming. I would love to hear that. And it'll fit in well with our School of Gaming next week, which we talk about how do you know if you're in too deep or how far you are into the hobby. So we're just kind of going into this rabbit hole of talking about jargon, using that jargon to keep people out, and when you have that sinking feeling that maybe you're too far in deep. So we'll talk about that next week. But in the meantime, let's move on to the high five. Every week, Michael and I highlight a list of games we want to play, enjoy, or spread the word about. And, you know, everybody loves lists. So this week, we're going to be talking about the high five games with powerful abilities. Now, for this list, I picked out games that, and there's a lot of games with abilities that players have. This one, I wanted to be a list of games that I'm playing, and I look across the table, and I'm constantly saying, you can't do that. Oh, that's your ability? Or, no, all of that you get to do? Like, they're so powerful that it's like, that just seems unfair that you have that ability, knowing full well that everybody else at the table is thinking the exact same thing about my ability. So not just a game with special abilities, but ones that are so powerful that they seem like they're breaking the game.
Yeah, and I approach mine slightly differently. I wanted to make sure that the whole game is not based on the ability. So that knocked out a lot of games that I could use. And then I wanted to, some of the games on my list are more subtle and some are very obvious. So I'm really looking forward to this. And I don't think we're going to have a ton of crossover. But yeah.
All right, what do you got at number 5, Michael?
Number 5 for me is Zombie Kids Evolution. This is a campaign game where the powers and abilities are revealed as the game is played and adds advanced levels to the game. So what starts out in the first, handful of adventures, this is a roll and move game, and we're cooperating here, nice little cooperative. Suddenly, as you get deeper in the game and the zombies get abilities, your own players get abilities that you can choose from as well. You might have a character that is able to clone themselves and be in a different part of the building, or a player who could do a special reroll. It's one where the abilities are kind of revealed as the game goes, and I think it adds a lot of flavor to that game. And was a game of the week back for us in episode 44. So for me, number 5 is Zombie Kids Evolution.
Great pick there. This one is my number 5 is the only cooperative game on my list, and it is one that I think is kind of a stand-in, but it does a really good job of what I'm describing, and that is the classic Pandemic, which we talked about way back when. But this is one of those games that you have a certain number of action points to spend a turn. And every player has their own unique special abilities. So some of them are, better at curing the disease. Some of them are better at treating disease. Some of them are better at getting around the board. And it always seems to me that you take your own ability for granted, and it's like, oh, I'm really good at treating cubes and getting the cubes off the board. But it's like, but I can't get anywhere. And then I look across the table, and it's like Michael's jet setting from continent to continent, getting around all over the place. It's like, and at the same time, he's thinking, yeah, it's great. I can move wherever I want, but I can't help any of these people.
Yeah.
So
you have to use those abilities together.
Pandemic does such a good job of the variety, but also giving you that feeling of like, every turn, I wish I had that ability just this one time. And everybody at the table kind of thinks that several times throughout the game. So that's my number 5, Pandemic. It's from Z-Man Games, came out in 2008, and designer Matt Leacock.
And it was our game of the week all the way back in episode 5. Please do not go back and listen to that. That was January 29th, 2021, Doug. So we might have to do a reboot of that.
This is our first 100 episodes. We're going to have to go back and redo them all.
At some point. Not all of them, but certainly that one. That's great. Yeah, my number 4, I mentioned I played it with this game with my mod and 2 of my kids. Last week it was our Spotlight in episode 201, and that is Zuvadis by Dr. Rainer Knizia. And where the powers are so cool in Zuvadis is that you only use them on other people's turn. So you are actually negotiating. You are bartering your powers away, and you can only do it twice. And the pieces are so cool, when you kind of hand over your power, your ability, and they all seem awesome. You have this, I'm not armadillo-looking character that lets people go off on their own path, right? And so when you sit at the table and 2 people are trying to give you special abilities that you get to use, it's a very different feeling, and that's my number 4 is Zuvadis, and I think it just leads so much into the replayability of the game because there's so many different roles that you can try out, and if you're playing with different groups, it just shifts that dynamic.
Yeah. All right, awesome. My number 4 is Scythe. This came out in 2016 from Jamie Stegmaier and Stonemaier Games. And in Scythe, everybody starts with a faction board, and you can unlock more abilities as you go. But you start out with an ability, and that is another one of those abilities that people are looking across the table and being like, that doesn't seem fair. When I'm unable to get my people to cross rivers, but Michael can do it freely, it seems terrible. When I can take the same action over and over again without having to move my piece, and Michael's like, why do I have to keep jumping back and forth? He thinks mine is overpowered. And I love that in games. I just love feeling like you have something unique, but then looking across and just being like, I wish I could go across the river now.
Yeah.
That would be very helpful. Instead, I'm going to have to work up and try and unlock that or things like that. So that is my number 4, Scythe. It's a heavier game, not one we've talked about on the podcast a lot, but a good example of that for me.
Great pull. Great pull. And it leads into my number 3, which we did talk on the podcast back in episode 106, and that's Tapestry. 2019, Stonemeyer Games, Jamie Stegmeyer is the designer. And my notes on Tapestry are that it's a balanced game, and each player has a player power that unbalances this civilization builder. So, in the base game, there's 4 different tracks that you're working up, and the real separator is your ability. And some of the abilities, you can only fire off a couple times per game compared to other abilities that are used more frequently. The other thing that I think is really interesting about it is that every time I think that I have this game complete, because some games I'm a completionist on, and other games I just dip my toe in the pool of that game. But every time I think I've got all of I've got all of Tapestry, I've got the playmat, I've got all the expansions, the designer has a balancing kit where where some of the abilities are slightly modified or refined or fine-tuned to balance the game more. I actually don't mind some of the unbalanced abilities from the earlier version. I think especially with helping people who are playing the game for the first time. No, have that one. That philosopher's going to help you out. Believe me, just trust me, you're going to want that one. That ability is a little bit better than the rest of the people at the table. So it's a nice way to scaffold people into the game as well. That's my number 3 is Tapestry.
Great choice. My number 3 is a very bright and vibrant game, and that is called Dreadful Meadows from 2023, Arcus Games and Lucas Adam. You start the game, everybody takes a confectioner ghoul. In this game, you are creating patches, and you are harvesting and getting candy to then buy more patches for your field and harvest more candy, fulfilling orders, and so on. However, each confectioner that you use has a very powerful, seemingly game-breaking power. For example, one of them allows you to ignore all the market costs when you purchase patches,
which is awesome.
Getting cards at patches at a complete discount. You can only have one sprite thing on a patch. One of them allows you to have multiple sprites on a patch. And so these type of abilities where it's like they are breaking the core rules of the game. And again, I'm repeating over and over again, but the idea of like, gosh, I wish I could get that for cheaper. I wish I could put a sprite out. I wish I could activate all of this extra stuff on my turn.
Great. And because the game's tight, right?
Yes.
And so the ability that you have in Dreadful Meadows matters.
Yeah.
The more time you can actually use your ability, it gives you that little bit of advantage with planting and harvesting. That's really good.
Yep. So that's my number 3, Dreadful Meadows.
And Teaser, we're scheduled to cover that in about 3 or 4 weeks. We have that in the queue, planned, ready to go, and just an awesome game. That's great, Doug. I'm talking a lot about games that we've covered in the past, and here's, I had a cooperative in Zombie Kids Evolution, but I wanted to bring in another cooperative that I think works really well with adults, and that's Adventure Party. In Adventure Party, which we covered, I wrote the note down wrong, in 178, designed by David Smith and co-designed with Travis Winstead, Smirk and Dagger Games. You're rolling dice and going on a little RPG adventure. We talk about this game at length. We've talked about it a lot, but it plays up to 8 players, and you might have the wizard or you might have the dwarf. And the ability is subtle, but everybody, if you can play into your ability, I think it really helps with increasing the fun of the game. So it's not that anyone's ability breaks the game. This is a game that I think helps people to get out of their shell a little bit.
Yeah.
And my wife might not always get to play as a dwarf or a wizard, right? If we're playing Bonanza Dahlia, she's not getting it. She is planting and maximizing, but it helps with the storytelling aspect. So that's my number 2, and one that I think has led to a lot of memories of late, and one that I just wanted to highlight here, Adventure Party.
Yeah, certainly one where you get out what you put in, right?
But it also helps to get people to put something out a little bit as well.
Yeah.
So.
My number 2 is a heavier game called Scarface 1920. This came out in 2023 from Red Zen Games, designers Tony Serratisaferum and Daniel Simone or Simon. I nailed it. Thank you. But in Scarface 1920, each person has a head boss, a mob boss that is leading their gang, and the abilities that the mob bosses have to start with, but then increase as they escalate through the game. It's another game. When I was playing this, was constantly looking over and be like, "Are you reading that right? You certainly can't be able to do all of those things in a single turn." And I think everybody had that same kind of feeling as you go and activate your boss. It's like, I'm going to do all of these things. And so talk about powerful abilities. That one's got it in spades. So that is my number 2, Scarface 1920.
Yeah, Doug did not like how I was using my boss. And just note for anyone who's playing that game in the future, go over the end game scoring and when the game ends. Very, very memorable time for me in my gaming history. When the game's over, it's over. You don't get that final sale. So awesome game. Man, I want to play that again, Doug. Good call there. Yeah, the different gangs really matter. I think we're going to have some crossover here on number 1. I feel almost bad talking about it because it's one that you talked about before I got to play it, one that I've played a lot lately, and that's The Voyages of Marco Polo. Yep, see a nod right there. I just had a recent play on Board Game Arena with some listeners to the podcast. I got absolutely smoked and had a wonderful time. I'm just going to tell you about my ability, Doug. I had the ability where you could split your camels. And your camels, or you had like not split your camels, but you have the 2 explorers who go in different directions. And man, anytime I get the choice to get that ability, it's like, well, why wouldn't I take that ability? 2, I'm really glad that if I don't take this ability, nobody else is going to get to do it because it's so awesome. And I feel like that every time I play the game.
Yeah. This is the game that created the idea for the list, is how powerful the special abilities are in this game. The classic example that I always use is that this is a game in which you roll dice and you use those dice for action. One of the players doesn't have to roll their dice. They just set them to whatever numbers that they want, which just seems like astronaut. Like, how can you do that? And then another one doesn't have to pay extra costs to go where people have already placed dice.
Yep.
You're like, what do you mean you can just add there? Yep, I can. And all of those game-breaking abilities that you're envious looking across the table.
Kublai starts in Beijing and has 10
on
points
the other
right
side
away.
of the board.
It's like, what do you mean? Okay, so we're all down by 10 to start? Huh?
Yeah.
How's this going to work?
Yeah, every ability looks great when you are pressed up against the guardrails of the game, and you see like, oh, but I can't do that, and that's where it shines. It's like, I can do this really well, but then the game rules hit you, and it's like, well, I wish I had the ability so I could jump over this guardrail now, but I don't. So that's, for me, it's the ultimate game of powerful abilities, and everyone gets one, and you're like, this is nuts.
And one that I continue to go back to Board Game Arena to play because I want to try the other abilities.
Yeah.
The way that we play games, it's not like we're going to play this game 15 times over the next 3 months.
Yeah.
Right. And so I am grateful that that version's out there and people play it, and boy, are people good at it.
Yeah.
That's the reason
Any
for the
honorable
list.
mentions for you, Michael?
I just brought these 5 in. I wanted to kind of shine a light on how the powerful abilities can kind of tip a game in one direction or another in different types of games. So these are the 5.
All right, so subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Follow us on X. Oh, and let us know which games with powerful abilities you love in the Discord,
Yeah.
or email us. We'd love to hear about those. So subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Follow us on X at GameSchoolerU. And again, subscribe, like our videos on YouTube. We appreciate that and helps out quite a bit. And join our Discord, gameschooler.com/Discord. Next week, we're going to be talking about Potions of Azurland, Enchanted Plumes. Are you in the hobby too deep? And
Yes.
games that feel like a simulation in a good way. Thank you so much for spending the last hour or so with us. We truly appreciate it.
Now get out there and keep gaming.